In this video, I'll describe tools and approaches to model packaging and deployment. It's one thing to build and train a machine learning model. It's another to package and deploy it to the world. You train a classifier, validate it, and tune it, and then when it passes testing, you're ready to release it into production. Let's say you have a sample of millions of labeled images that either contain a giraffe or don't. You want to publish an online API that allows people to upload an image, and the API will return a true or false whether or not the image contains a giraffe. Well, your model gets built on a workstation you run code on, perhaps an R program with a computer vision library, but your API is running Python code, perhaps Django or Flask application servers. What do you need to consider when putting this model into production? What gets packaged and deployed? What format is it in? These are the kinds of questions we need to answer when we're talking about model packaging and deployment. So let's talk about packaging. Well, I tend to focus on R or Python when talking about machine learning models because these are the language that I'm most familiar with when it comes to data science. Both R and Python have their typical methods for serializing data. If you're mixing systems, which I don't recommend doing, but sometimes you have no choice, there are ways to mix R models in Python and vice versa. You could always save coefficients for simple models in any format you'd like, so instead of serializing the objects directly, you could save the important values that define the model, usually arrays or matrices of values. So what typically gets packaged are binary files, either PKL files for pickle, the standard method for serializing objects in Python, or RData files if you're using R. Now, when we're talking about deployment, we carry out the process of build and serialize, but then we need to load it for prediction. In the build phase, we're always comparing the current version of a model, whether or not it's using the same machine learning method. Building in machine learning often means training and validating where testing is left for the integration phase. So in a DevOps world, this means it's carried out in the continuous integration step when code is merged. So once the build phase is carried out, then we need to start thinking about where this model is going to go and how it's going to get there. We end up with a file that contains the model in a serialized form. So it's an object from our code that's saved to a file, and it can be reloaded back into another program and instantiated so it might be called upon again. I demonstrated an example of model serialization in the video titled Model Serialization. So that's what we're thinking about. In the back of our minds, that's the mental model of what's happening. So in deploying a model, this serialized instance of a model that we have in the form of a file gets loaded by an application and served in some way. Well, what do we talk about when we're talking about serving?